The Emeritus Center is here to support Emeritus during their years after they retire from the campus, they leave the campus, in support of their professional research, community service, whatever. And we try to bring in speakers that keep people interested, lifelong learning. That led a year ago to starting a new program, Albany Lifelong Learning Institute, that's what we call it. And we put on courses every semester. I don't know if any of you have been to any of these courses. They've been very well received. There's still time to sign up for courses this year. And I'm just going to run down the ones that we're offering this year for a while. The first one is weather and weather forecasting. And the intent of the courses, by the way, is to give you the experience as if you were in the classroom without tests, papers, anything like that. So faculty are usually from the campus who come in and provide these, and we've had really good feedback on the people who've attended these courses. So weather and weather forecasting. There's one that Murders That Matter, Notorious Cases That Changed the Law, was very popular, was coming. Unfortunately, the faculty member had something come up, they can't do the course, so that one is off. AI and Society, Understanding Artificial Intelligence in Everyday Life, maybe. Who knows? But that one actually is full, right? That one got filled up pretty quick. So we're probably going to offer that again next semester. Keep your eyes open on that one. George Eliot's Middlemarch, Then and Now, Moral Problems in Medicine, and Blue Zones, Living Very Long and Healthy Lives with Purpose. So we try to give varied courses. Hopefully, if you can think you might want to attend, there's a listing back here, how to sign up and whatnot. And with that commercial announcement, I will now turn it over to Scott Birch, who will introduce our speaker.
Wow. Thank you all for coming. I put a little blurb in there saying that by coming to this, you won't have to wear a scarf or mittens. And look what happened last Monday. So I checked with Bruce and he said, you know, it's probably better they don't have to wear their scarf and mittens inside the room. So thank you, Bruce, for rescheduling for us and with us. And welcome to the third Emeritus Center Spring Speaker Program. Today we welcome Dr. Bruce Dudek to the Emeritus Center. Bruce is a UAlbany professor of psychology who has been teaching here at Albany since 1978. And we're so happy to have him bring some natural brightness and warmth to the second day of March. But before I continue, Bruce, I'd like to sneak in a mention of our next presentation, next Monday, March the 9th. And I'm sneaking it in now because I used to do it at the end. And everybody enjoyed it, everything so much that they would talk and talk and talk, and I never had a chance to preview it. So I'm going to steal a second here. So I want to make note of this upcoming gig next Monday, because I know we're so excited. We will too want to chat after the program. And next week's program will be on virtual reality, disaster preparedness, and the public with Dee Bennett Gale, who is a superstar all of a sudden, doing a bunch of stuff. And Dee is the associate professor and Associate Dean for Research at the College of Emergency Preparedness, Homeland Security, and the College of Emergency Preparedness. I got lost. And I'm not even a president. Oh, well, sorry. She has a program that deals with findings on virtual reality that will help. She started out with older folks, and now she's moving it to some other populations of concern, but basically takes them through with those blinders and things and takes them through what a disaster thing is like, so that they're prepared. And she's getting a lot of really, really great reviews for that. And she'll present her findings from her project, and talking about the risk to older adults, which I thought kind of fit us. By the way, all four of our upcoming programs are, as of today, on the U Albany calendar of events webpage for your information and as a reminder. Back to today's program and our guest. Bruce received his MA and PhD from SUNY Binghamton, where his major areas of study were biopsychology, behavioral genetics, and neurobiology way back when. He's been here since 1978. He's an active member of the university life with 28 years experience as a faculty member, primary responsibilities for 2 semesters in statistics design sequence required of all graduate students in our department, clinical and experimental programs, and he's a university senator and a big Great Dane fan. His many destinations have included the ADK bogs, seabird colonies in the Icelandic Arctic Circle, and the Canadian Maritimes. He'll also share his photography goodies of feathered friends, wild orchids, various critters, and fascinating vistas. Let's get to Bruce's. Finally, please welcome Bruce Dudek.
Thank you, Scott. What a treat to see all these familiar faces. I'm just testing my device here, which I'm glad I tested because it's not working. Oh, there we go. All right. So when I have to be tethered to this for the video, that's going to be a challenge for me, but I'll try. When Dan Smith asked me if I would give a presentation here, I took a look at the list of past presenters, saw lots of faculty giving really fascinating talks about things they were doing. And I scratched my head and thought, what I've been doing the last few years is spending time looking for strategies and pedagogies in teaching statistics, including programming projects and visualizations and so on. But I quickly realized that if I spoke on that, the attendance would probably be 0. Fortunately, Dan recalled that I do nature photography and have for less than 20 years now. I don't think he understood the depths of the affliction, though, so you'll be subjected to that here. Let me just take a moment and say, it's a little uncomfortable putting this slide with this title up today after the weekend events in the Middle East, but I'm going to plunge ahead. And let me just take an aside to explain where my title came from. 2 origins. When my kids were young, come December, frequently the question would be, Daddy, what do you want for Christmas? And my snotty answer would invariably be peace and quiet with the 2 boys in the house. And I have another slide here to remind myself what it really is about. I took this picture in January in the Whitney Wilderness, southwest of Tupper Lake. Drove in off Route 30 on a back road for a couple miles, parked at a trailhead, and then I snowshoed in a place where I was looking for red crossbills, a particular species that I had seen there before, of course, carrying camera gear in my backpack. And I couldn't find any crossbills, but I found this cluster of chickadees, black-capped chickadees. You can see is on the icy branch. So I put my backpack down, started unpacking my camera, and all of a sudden I realized it's probably as much quiet as I've ever experienced in my life. It was a cold morning, single digits. It was absolutely no wind, bluebird, blue sky, and no other bird song. And it was just eerily quiet. And I have experienced that kind of thing in a number of places and times when I've been out tromping around in the forest, particularly the Adirondacks. But it was so striking to me. And this was already after I had agreed to give the talk. So I knew at that point it had to be the title. So, I see lots of familiar faces here. Some of you I don't think I've met, but you may have seen me around campus because, as Scott said, I have been here forever. Others of you may recognize my face because you've been to UAlbany athletic events, which I've spent a lot of time doing photography for the athletics department for the last several years. And for 2 years, I worked photographing the thoroughbred races at Saratoga, which was thoroughly fascinating from many points of view for a psychologist, and the gambling. It's fascinating, the sociology of the place, the animal behavior, just amazing. But it's really nature photography that floats my boat. I did take it up late in life, although I had done some photography early on in my professional work. But I grew up in Florida, surrounded by nature. I was more of a frog and fish kind of kid, not so much birds, which is what really has had my attention more recently. I have a formal background in biology and graduate training in animal behavior. So this is kind of a natural. And I was doing sports photography with my kids, but then they went off to college, and now what do I do? Well, fortunately, at that point in time, I had motivation from someone in the room who suggested birding and bird photography. And Professor Pipkin is the reason that this is all happening. But now I've kind of branched out way beyond just birds, although the majority of what I'll show you today is birds. I'm going to start with the Adirondacks, which has been an obsession now for 15 years. You can see the subtopics I'm going to go through. I think landscape photography is probably my weakest genre, so I'm just going to show you a few of these. This is sort of a classic Adirondack photo. It's called a bow shot, taken out the front of your canoe. And it's also classic Adirondack vista because it's a foggy, very early morning. This is the Boreas Ponds. And the little peak sort of directly in front of the bow is not so little, that's Mount Marcy. And this is another classic Adirondack photo. You carry your canoe somewhere and you take a photograph of it. That's Blue Mountain in the background. Here I paddled another canoe up the Cedar River on a camping trip. I've probably focused most of the landscape photography I've done has been fall foliage kind of things. This is Henderson Lake, and I love this spot because those dead white birches at the shoreline in the distance set off against the fall foliage really has captured my attention. I've photographed it many different times in different conditions. This was my cover slide, which is just reminding me to say that foggy Adirondack photography is a genre of its own. Some of you may know Tom Bissett, who worked here for many years. Tom is sort of a specialist in this. He's probably taken exactly this photo in a place called Forked Lake. The early mornings pre-sunrise and around sunrise are truly very peaceful when you're the only one on the water and it's flat water. There's a little story with this one. I left the house in the middle of the night one August morning and drove to a trailhead above Minerva to carry my boat into this little pond. Only about a half-mile carry, but it was dark because I wanted to be on the pond for sunrise. So I'm traversing this rocky Adirondack trail downhill to the pond. I got there. I paddled around for a while, and as the sun started to come up, I knew I was going to be able to get the photo I wanted, but I was really disappointed because I was hoping for at least a few wispy clouds in the sky. What I didn't realize till I got home to the computer was that not only did I have the sunburst, but I had its reflection on the water in front of me. That's a cherished photo. Another beautiful sunrise, Adirondack Pond. And when you're in your canoe, you can get different views of things than one normally would. And so the photo in the upper left is a view toward the north, the south side of Wallface Mountain. And it's a view you can only get from being in your canoe. And in most of this photography, I've been in my canoe. And the one on the right as well, that is Crane Mountain poking its head up over a lower bank of brilliant fall foliage. And of course, fall foliage requires finding spots to get reflections. I've succeeded with that from time to time as well. And here's your classic Adirondack photo of Blue Mountain Lake with the lineup of Adirondack chairs at the resort that's right there. The name of the resort escapes me. Well, it's not all fall foliage and it's not all brilliant blue skies. This was a somewhat arduous hike into a place called Wolf Pond, which is east of Newcomb, with the ominous skies, beautiful boulders in the foreground. This is very typical Adirondack kind of view. If the clouds had not been there, you would be able to see the high peaks in the background. But I think I like the fact that the clouds were there. And sometimes I try to get a little bit artsy, which is out of my character being a scientist by training. But this was reflections of trees and the water at some point. I have photographed waterfalls. Don't do as much of that anymore. It's a little risky walking on icy rocks coming up the creeks. I try a little Milky Way photography, which is very difficult in the East because there's so much light pollution in the skies, but I succeed once in a while. And this is the same spot taken earlier that same night in the blue hour after sunset, but before the sky is really dark. And talk about peace and quiet. You know, I'm the only one out here at this point in the middle of the night being stupid enough to point a camera in the sky. And to get peace and quiet, you really have to dedicate yourself to being there. It's not a drive up and experience. And camping is the way to do it. This is from a canoe camping trip. And you see my tent in the background. In the foreground is a tarp that I have. What you can't tell is that there's a mesh across the front of the yellow tarp that keeps the bugs out. So I tend to use this as my living room in black fly season. Well, let's look at some critters. I know this is not a moose. I was in my canoe photographing against the shoreline early one morning, this species, which is an alder flycatcher. And I turned around, and what's swimming across the lake but a moose, first moose I had ever seen. And she exited not 25 yards in front of me. So I'd say that the photo on the left is probably what truly hooked me with nature photography. It was the first canoe camping trip I had done in the Adirondacks, and here a moose came right out in front of my canoe. So I was truly hooked. I've seen moose a few other times in the Adirondacks. Here's a bull moose at Helldiver Pond, a place where this moose tended to go there every year in July for a few years. It was fairly predictable. So I didn't find this really on my own. I had information. There he is again, upper left. Now the lower right is the same moose that I took. I've been there several times, so I'm not sure it was the same trip as the upper left photo. But on the lower right, I was not in my canoe. I was on the shoreline one evening after sunset, and I noticed him across the way. So here you have this bull moose scratching the inside of his right hind leg and giving us a nice view of his rear end. Now, there are moose that are closer by. This moose I found one morning at a little pond called West Vly. If you go west from Saratoga 10 or so miles and then north to Lake Desolation and then up and over the hill, Fox Hill Road, there is a moose population there. And I've seen sign of them lots of times when I've been doing bird photography, but haven't run across them more than, I think, twice. And so I had this one photo. So this is, within an hour from us. And there are not as many deer in the Adirondacks as there are the surrounding areas, but there are deer there, and I run across them once in a while. I put this here just to remind me to tell you that if you don't know, both moose and deer lose their rack, their antlers, every year. They shed them, and they grow them back. So on the right is a photo taken in the spring of probably a young buck, and you can see the little knobs on the top of his head. Can you guys in the back see it? The little knobs are growing. And I run across fawns once in a while. I'll tell you a little story about the one on the lower left. This was taken just last July. I was hiking out of the woods on an expedition where I was looking for a particular orchid species. And there was this tangle of trees down, and I just happened to look to the left, and there's a fawn. And this is really just probably a few weeks, maybe even only a few days old. So what the does do is they find a spot like this and they leave the fawn and they go to forage. And they're incredibly well camouflaged. They're perfectly still. I wasn't 5 feet from this fawn when I noticed it. Its eyes were tracking me, but it didn't move a muscle. And they don't have scent. So they're very safe from predators when the mothers leave them. I didn't want to take the time to bother it by getting out my big photo gear from my pack. I just snapped a cell phone photo and went on my way. And now we'll go to what is probably my primary passion, photographing common loons and the young chicks right on the back of the parents for the first perhaps 10 days of life. And, the animal behaviorist in me can spend hours and has spent hours and hours watching loons. Not all loon pairs are tolerant enough to get close enough to photograph. And I'm not as close as the photo makes it look because I have my big telephoto lens. But this is a pretty challenging photo to take. Now, remember, I'm in my canoe, and these birds, they're moving around. So to have the orientation right, where the plane of focus is cutting through all three birds, and they all have their head in the same orientation, and they look like they're looking at me, requires probably several thousand photos to get the one where it worked out. But this one is special, taken on July 4, 2023 in Paradox Lake. And I love this kind of shot where the chicks are tucked underneath the wing of the adult and poking their head out. And once again, it takes a lot of patience to get all the heads in the right orientation so everything's in focus. And you can see a little early morning sun shining on the water of the upper left. And a couple more. And I love to photograph the loons on foggy early mornings as well. This is a singleton chick. Usually they have two, but sometimes the one is predated or doesn't survive. So this was a surviving single. I know because of earlier visits to the lake that same year that this bird is probably 10 days old, but it's huge. And that's because it's only one, and both parents are feeding it. And so if you're patient, you can get interesting behaviors, the yawn in the upper left, the foot waggle in the lower right. Now, adults do that foot waggle to thermoregulate. And it's not clear that the chick needs to be thermoregulating. It may just be exercising its neural circuitry and practicing for when it needs to thermoregulate the same way. And if you're really lucky, you can get a chick that's doing both of them at the same time. This tells you how many hours I've spent on the water photographing loons to be able to come up with this. I call this kind of photo breakfast in bed. Okay. The way I really know that the loon pairs are tolerant is if they continue feeding the chicks and they're not bothered by my presence in the area. And I have several of these. Constant feeding going on. These chicks grow so rapidly, and the parents work so hard to find fish of the right size. Some parents aren't good at that. They'll bring fish that are too big. And they try to overfeed the chicks as well. So now here's both parents. The chick, I remember this moment, and I think the chick had already had enough. And then if the chicks have had enough, then the adult will eat it. Can you guys see in the back with the small screen that the fish is between the the upper and lower bill. A fun photo. So these loons are really bizarre looking creatures, sort of ancient species feel to it. But they're really hard to photograph in flight. They're so fast. I don't have many good photographs at all of common loons in flight. So they nest very close to the water because they can't walk very far very easily. Their legs are attached to really at the rear of the abdomen. I was not in my canoe for this one. I don't like to approach the nest this closely. I was actually on a road that cut past this pond and had a long telephoto lens where I noticed the nest. Sunrise photos are great. And again, it didn't just happen on this scene with this adult and the chicks being all parallel to my canoe. I had to wait and navigate and wait and navigate. And of course, the adults have this classic wing flapping that they do after they preen. And the young will practice that. Quick story about this. Several times I had the experience where I was photographing a loon family, and all of a sudden, the adults would depart and swim out to the middle of the lake, 100, 200 or so yards away. And, the first time it happened, I couldn't sort out why they left the chicks with me. Of course, that's how I was thinking of it. But now each time this has happened, I've scanned the lake and I've found a bald eagle perched. Bald eagles are serious predators of young loon chicks. So perhaps it's an evasive behavior where the distraction behavior where the adults are keeping the attention of the eagle at some place quite distant. But the interesting thing is that they left them with me. So had to be an element of trust there as well. But also maybe the eagles are smarter than we might give them credit for, because the eagles are not going to approach a human in a canoe. So what it probably is that these sessions of photographing the chicks are often against shorelines. And so they leave them against shorelines where it's more protected. And I just happened to be there. And I think this is my last common loon photo of a nice sunny water and semi-silhouetted loon. So the boreal forest of the northern hemisphere extends down into northern New York and the Adirondacks, but it's very patchy. So there are boreal birds there, and I'll show you a few of these species. Black-backed woodpecker. These are all birders' favorite species to go find. Palm warbler, nests in bogs. Yellow-bellied flycatcher. And the famed Canada jay. You can find them fairly easily at several spots, and some of them are accustomed to coming to hand to feed. This is a fun Canada jay photo that I took. Can you tell that it's in mid-jump? So I call this bird levitation. This is a Lincoln sparrow, a very elusive bird. I only have 2 photos of this species. The other one's not very good, so I'm thrilled to have captured this. This is an olive-sided flycatcher, which is quite diminished in numbers in the last few decades across the Adirondacks. It's too bad I don't have a recording. This bird is the song of the northern forest. This is a white-throated sparrow. This is a white-winged crossbill, which, along with red crossbills, frequents a few spots in the Adirondacks. They're not just coming down in the winter like many finch species are, but some of them are there year-round, but they're very nomadic, hard to find. This is a purple finch, which I would not call a boreal species, but I like the photo anyway. It looks like it's It's looked like it's a finch drenched in Campari or something, right? It's incredible red color. Common redpolls are among a group of finch species that once in a while come down from Canada in the winter when the seed crop is poor, but I've not seen them in a few years. Beautiful little bird. This is an evening grosbeak, which is another one of these eruptive species. It's underneath a bird feeder I think in Newcomb, feeding on seeds that have dropped to the ground from the feeder. The scarlet tanager is not a boreal species and it's not Adirondack specific, but I photographed this one in the Adirondack, and that striking color is always fun to show. Same with indigo bunting, which you can find here in abundance. This is one most of you probably haven't seen, a northern water thrush carrying some sort of critter, presumably back to a nest. Cedar waxwings, beautiful bird, winter shot. George, what are these berries? Do you know? I never identified them. Could be. Ruby-crowned kinglet, which does nest in New York and the higher elevations. I probably photographed this one on Whiteface Mountain. The stunning Blackburnian warbler looking straight at you. And the Canada warbler. And I'll come back to photos of them in another section in a moment. And I'm going to show you photos of 3 species of thrush. Swainson's thrush, hermit thrush, and Bicknell's thrush, which is a very threatened species. There's a long, fascinating story about it. But just by looks, it's kind of hard to distinguish them. But the songs are distinguishable, which is how I usually know what I'm doing. Beautiful little bird, a Philadelphia vireo with that lemon chiffon breast and belly. Blue-headed vireo. As I'm looking at these photos, I'm thinking back to the years I spent with John first starting to do this stuff. And I know exactly what John is thinking is that, these are different than the photos I was taking back then. I've worked hard to try to figure out the craft, not only the technical parts of the camera, but what's so important is the composition. And the part of the composition that's most critical is not the bird, but the background. The good bird photos come when the background is distant, and with the telephoto lens, that background is all blurred out. And you see that here. And once in a while, I'm lucky. This is an ovenbird taken in the Adirondacks, but you can find that in Thatcher Park in 5 seconds when you hop out of the car in the summer. This is a pine siskin, another species that erupts down from Canada some winters. And you might find things that are not birds. I mean, you have to spend a lot of time in the woods to be as lucky as I am, and then you're lucky. I've photographed several red foxes, but this one has a coat that's almost perfect. It's really beautiful. Beaver are all over the place in the Adirondacks. I'm reminded of, I put this in because I've been reading a book on indigenous history in the Adirondack uplands, and it mentioned something that I knew but had forgotten. Across North America shortly after the Ice Age was the time of very large mega mammals, and there was a species of beaver called a giant beaver, which apparently was as big as grizzlies. Now our beaver is not a direct descendant, but I do see them once in a while. I do photograph them, but it's really nice when the water is flat. All right, now I'm going to go a completely different direction, something that's captured my fancy heavily for the last few years. When you talk about wild orchids with people, most people have no clue there are nearly 60 species of wild orchids in New York. And if they are a little bit aware, the first thing that occurs to them is pink lady slippers. But these are sort of dime a dozen. The naturalist community that I bump into are kind of bored by these. They're not interesting because they're so common. I think I took the photo in the upper left in Coal Hill State Forest, just southwest of here. But if you spend enough time in the woods, you run across interesting things. This is a white morph of a pink lady slipper. There is a species of white lady slippers, but I think I did my homework at the time I took this and convinced myself this is actually a pink lady slipper. And lots of wildflowers do have alternate morphs that are uncommon like this. In fact, I vividly recall showing George red trillium in Thatcher Park that is a white morph. And there are yellow lady slippers. In fact, there are multiple species. And these two I took in an abandoned quarry in Vermont, not in the Adirondacks. This is a small lady slipper, yellow lady slipper. And then there's the regal showy lady slipper. You had no idea, did you? And when you find orchids in one place, sometimes there are other orchids. And so this whitish flower in the foreground is sometimes called a bog candle or a white bog orchid. It took me 5 years to find this plant. I had directions that weren't great from actually someone who had kind of become my guru for all things orchid Adirondacks. And I trekked this trail multiple times and I never really knew, was I just not in the right place or were they not blooming that year? Finally, this past year, on May 27, I found this in an early stage of bloom. It's called a showy orchis. The sad part is the next day, the woman who had been giving me the directions passed away. Her son tried to tell her that I had found it. We're not sure if she understood. Evelyn Green, George, do you know that name? A spectacular orchid, Platanthera macrophylla, the large pad-leaved orchid. Those leaves that you see, the basal pair of leaves in the photo on the left, are about the size of my hand. They're big leaves. This plant can get up to even 2 feet tall. These are not two photos of the same plant. I've seen it and photographed it in 3 different places. They don't come up every year. It's always a crapshoot. But don't they have interesting features? Now, I'm going to try to use the mouse. What distinguishes the large pad-leaf orchid from the small one, which is Platanthera obiculata, is the length of the spur. And this is the spur here. So it's long on this one and it's shorter on the other species. And there's a close-up of a floret. Where by sheer luck, the one hike that I did into this spot, it was at a perfect bloom time and the yellow seed pods have not over-ripened yet. And I used some lighting to be able to take this photograph. So this long piece here is not the spur, it's the lip of this orchid. These are rose begonias, which are not uncommon in the Adirondacks. I find them in lots of places, but what's unusual is this spot where I photographed these is the outlet stream of Mason Lake. I'm in my canoe, and there are sphagnum bog mats lining the outlet. And if you're lucky, you may get there in a year where there are thousands and maybe tens of thousands in bloom at the same time, just a carpet of pink. Since I'm in my canoe, I haven't found a good way to get a photo of that array of pink. Speaking of pink, these are called grass pink orchids. A difficult photograph to process because the digital sensors of cameras have a hard time with these purplish, pinkish kinds of colors. And I'm never certain that I got it quite right. This is a bit of a homely orchid. I often photograph orchids with a black velour cloth behind to set it off, and that's what you see on the left. This is called Hooker's orchid, not because the lip looks like a hook, but named after the director of a garden in London named Hooker. But the real story here is the New York National Heritage Project webpage says there are 4 spots in New York where this orchid is found. And in the naturalist community that I have bumped shoulders with in the last few years, they say that's wrong. There are really only 2. And I've been to both. And the one spot where you see these plants, these are 2 plants in one spot, somewhere south of Brant Lake. And so they're extremely rare, disappearing rapidly, and I'm thrilled that I photographed them, but they're not in perfect bloom at this point. I got there too late. So I've been going back trying to get a more perfect bloom, but another year I went back, they weren't blooming, and the other spot, they weren't blooming. It's challenging. There's a close-up of what Hooker's orchid looks like. And you can see in the bottom right, the seed pod is not a nice formed yellow like the other one. It's a little past perfect. I'm so glad George came today because he first gave me a tip on a place to go that would be easier to get to than where I originally tried to photograph this species. This is Arethusa bulbosa, the dragon's mouth orchid. And I've photographed it in 4 different places now. In 3 of those places, the background is what you see. It's dead grasses, ugly. Okay. At least the one on the right, there was a little crab spider showing its little pink epaulets to match the flower. Well, last summer, I did a hike on the tip of my guru Evelyn to a kettle bog to try to find more of these Arethusa. And so this was quite a challenging hike for me. Down an old logging road and then bushwhacking through the forest and then tromping in my muck boots through about 100 yards worth of cedar swamp out into a bog mat surrounding a little kettle bog to find the species with a green background behind it. Okay. That's the extent that this affliction has taken hold of me to do this on a sweltering summer morning. There's the bog, kettle bog. It's about 100 yards across. And the reddish circular area is the sphagnum bog mat. This is a true kettle bog left over from the Ice Age, surrounded by some spruce trees and then surrounded off the edges by the cedar swamp that I had to tromp through. That was a very rewarding photo for me. I love fringed orchids. This is a lesser purple fringed orchid. They start blooming at the bottom, and as time passes, the blooms open at the top. So I like to photograph them at this stage before the tops are fully open, because if you wait later, then the bottom flowers will be ratty. Up close. This is a white morph of a purple fringed orchid. This is a greater purple fringed orchid, not determined by size, but by the shape of the opening of the mouth and the white spot in the center there, and the orientation of the petals and sepals up top. And I love to take photos of orchids from the top to show the radial nature of how they bloom. This is a white fringed orchid. Up close and from the top. And here's a bog where they're blooming. Can you pick out the little white dots in the bottom? That's the white fringed orchids. So again, you do this kind of photography very early in the morning when the wind isn't there, because if you wait, the flowers are going to be moving and they're very hard to photograph. This is a hybrid that is confusing the naturalist group that I have hung out with. It's probably a hybrid between a white fringed orchid, which blooms profusely in this little bog where I photographed this, and an orange fringed orchid. But no one has ever seen the orange fringed orchid there. But once in a while, this lighter orange pops up. I don't know that anybody has tried to do DNA testing or anything with this specimen. This is a ragged fringed orchid, the only one I've ever seen. And then there's a fascinating group of orchids called, the genus is Spiranthes. The one on the left is a sphinx orchid, and the one on the right is a hooded lady's tresses. And they're tiny little spiky things. You would never know that they're orchids. And there are many ditches and roadsides in the Adirondack you can drive by, and they're coming up in September and October, and you'd think they're weeds, but they're orchids. There are quite a few species, and it's a complicated set of species. And often when you're photographing orchids in a bog, you find other things. That's a pitcher plant flower behind the white fringed. And here's what it looks like in full bloom. Pitcher plant being the insectivorous plant. I'll switch to a quick tour back through some birds, not Adirondack-y things, but generally the songbird group. And I'm going to try to be quiet and just flip through these and let you read the species names, except for the first two I'll mention. These two species you can hear any May and June in Five Rivers, in the Pine Bush Preserve, and open field areas, prairie warbler and blue-winged warbler. And I love to photograph birds in blooming apple orchards. So most of the bird species I'm showing you are males, right? The brightly plumaged, but they're also perched out more prominently than the females, which during nesting season are often going to be on the nest. Trying to keep in the theme of the peace and quiet here for a moment. Bay-breasted does not nest in New York. It's a through migrant. Will nest in Canada. Very fortunate to have seen them a few times. Same with Cape May warbler. Blackpoll nests on the top of Whiteface Mountain. This was photographed in New Jersey, the so-called swamp warbler. So this warbler group and the vireos, I've got a couple of vireos, most of them overwinter in Central and South America, neotropical migrants, neo meaning New World. These tiny little songbirds, they're all over the trees here in the summer, and you rarely see them. And their song is beautiful and diverse. And I have to relearn it every year, you know. See the eye on that? That's amazing. And I'll finish with my I think what are my two favorite warblers. Mourning, because it's been so hard for me to find them, but I now have a reliable spot for them in Otsego County. And Canada warblers, because it was the first warbler I ever photographed. All right, I'll switch to raptors. The success story of the reintroduction of bald eagles into New York is amazing. If you've not heard that story of how DEC did it, it's an amazing, amazing story. You can see them all up and down the Mohawk and Hudson River and all over the Adirondacks. I photographed these two birds in January in Cohoes. Every winter, especially if it's a severe winter like this winter, when the rivers ice over, there's open water below the falls and below some of the dams along the Mohawk, and eagles congregate. Estimates are as many as 60 eagles were congregating in late December and early January around Cohoes Falls. So I photographed these two in flight. The one on the lower right, if you're not skilled in bird identification, is a bald eagle. It's just that they don't achieve their full adult plumage until they're 4 years old. And so the one on the bottom right is probably a yearling. A fun photo. The scientist in me won't let me say what I want to say. I don't want to be too anthropomorphic, but let's just say I've never seen a bird give me this pose. I call this Nipper the eagle, right after the RCA dog, right? Snowy owls. The one on the left I photographed at the Albany airport a few years ago. The one on the right I photographed in Ontario last January, a year ago. Same in Ontario. Also in Ontario on that trip was in the middle of this intense snow squall, and I had spotted a snowy owl on the ground, and a rough-legged hawk and a raven came in, and so I was able to get this photo of the raven chasing the snowy owl in the middle of an intense snow squall. This is a northern hawk owl. I spent 3 hours with this bird on a snowy hillside in Vermont quite a few years ago now. And it perched on the perch that you see it on the upper left for about, I would say, at least 45 minutes. I was with it waiting for it to do something. But I knew it was hunting. It had the postures and scanning that it was waiting for a sound to emerge from underneath the snow. And then I wasn't quick enough to get it as it took off the perch, but I photographed it after it hit the ground. You probably can't see in the back, but it's got a mouse. That's the mouth, and there's the tail. So it was success. A barred owl is probably the most common owl in our area, Barred. But short-eared owls come down from the north during the winter. And this was taken in the Fort Edwards grasslands a couple years ago. And flight shots of this beautiful short-eared owl with those eyes. This is a rough-legged hawk. This is a northern harrier, a female northern harrier hunting over a field in Ontario in a snowstorm. This is a merlin, a small member of the falcon family, taken from my canoe. Can you imagine? Now I'm sitting holding this giant lens, trying to take a photograph of a bird at the top of a tree. And if you're really lucky, you can run across bald eagles mating. And my favorite raptor photo is this. I knew this barred owl roosted in a barn overnight, and I happened to be in this area early one morning, driving by the barn, and I saw it perched in the glassless window. So here you have a barred owl in a barn. And here's a hodgepodge of things I'm just going to fly through. The whole population of snow geese from eastern Canada will overwinter on the eastern seaboard in the U.S., Delaware, the Delmarva Peninsula, Virginia. And so overnight, they're on the freshwater impoundments or out in the Delaware Bay. And in the morning, they all fly inland to cornfields. This is why they're there. So pre-dawn, if you're lucky, and you can see the pre-dawn sky colors in the background. I spoke with some of the scientists at a couple of the nature preserve, the not national wildlife reserves there, and they say that some years 500,000 snow geese are there. I'll switch to some herons. This is a great blue heron pair, courtship on a nest that they're building. This is between Anley Pond and CBA High School. I will jump off the scientist mode and become anthropomorphic here and point out that in this courtship, they're making a little heart, right? But all is not so copacetic in the bird world. Here is a great blue heron nest, same location, and you can see the siblings squabbling. What you may not see in the more lower right, underneath the adult, is another bird. It's not dead, but I had been observing this nest for a few days, and the other siblings had been constantly pecking at it. The next day I came back and it was gone. So sibling competition is not uncommon because it's only two adults bringing food back. If you find a nice glassy piece of water and a blue heron is standing peering into the water, eventually it's going to strike for a fish, and somehow I was lucky and I caught it. This is an American bittern. Again, another bird I really should give you an audio of. If it was a bird talk, I would. The call is amazing. And this is an elusive least bittern. Many of you have been to Florida, you've seen white ibis. I just kind of like this one I caught on a perch. This is at a rookery in New Jersey. And the requisite northern cardinal on a snowy balsam bough in my backyard. Pine grosbeak eating crab apples, kind of a messy eater. A few shorebirds. Piping plover chicks, Maine and Nickerson Beach in Long Island. Purple sandpiper. This was in New Jersey or Delaware. I actually saw them in my trip to Iceland that I'll get to in a moment. Dunlin. This young herring gull had plucked this blue crab out of the surf and flew up to the beach with it, dropped it, and the title for this photo is Blue Crab Fights Back. Can you guys in the back see the pinchers up?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've seen a lot of photos that are sort of bird portraits, but it's really the action that I like. This is a black skimmer in the blaze of an early morning sunrise. American oyster catcher on the left with a mold crab flying back to a nest to feed its young. And there's an oyster catcher young trying out the surf. Common tern bringing a fish back to the nest. Tree swallows mating, showing a common behavior pattern in many different species of birds, particularly ducks I've seen this in, where the male will grab a cluster of feathers on the female's head. I am assuming that it's probably to assist in balance. At any rate, tree swallows mating. The spectacularly plumaged wood duck. Normally, I wouldn't have tried to photograph the wood duck on the kind of water on the right where it's kind of choppy. Doesn't make for a great photo, but this gust of wind came up from behind. So I call this wood duck Spike. Actually, he's Spike 2. You're going to see Spike 1 in a minute. Long-tailed duck. Marsh wren, what a great pose. Threatened salt marsh sparrow in Connecticut. I call them red-winged blackbirds, but they're orange.
Yeah.
Those epaulets are very orange. This is a female eastern towhee, which I hardly ever see lots of males. She popped up on this branch with a beautiful background, and my camera couldn't resist. And of course, the Baltimore Oriole in the apple orchard. And an orchard oriole and an apple orchard. Only black-billed cuckoo I've ever photographed. I've heard dozens of them. Pileated woodpecker in flight. There's a perched pileated woodpecker. Red-headed woodpeckers, which we don't see around here much, but they make appearances every few years. Woody woodpecker, right? And the fabled yellow-bellied sapsucker, which is a harbinger of spring. And I heard one drumming in my neighborhood about 12 days ago. So that's good. It's better, it's more reliable than Punxsutawney Phil predicting the end of winter. Yellow shafted northern flicker, and you can see a little bit of the yellow in the tail. Bobolink is a field bird. Again, I would love to play audio. They have the most incredible call.
Where was that one?
This was taken in a field west of Johnstown. Least flycatcher. Probably taken in Partridge Run. Great crested flycatcher from someplace in the Adirondacks. Driving down a back road in the Adirondacks one day, I saw a ruffed grouse family, female and several chicks, and I waited for them to cross in front of my car, pulled up, lowered my window. I had my camera ready, and fortunately, one of the chicks popped up on a branch to allow me to photograph. I didn't think the photo was going to work out because it was so dark, but it's okay. Quick tour through Alaska. I didn't go there for bird photography. I was there for 3 weeks 7 years ago, visiting my sister in Fairbanks. But I was determined to find this American three-toed woodpecker, which had been in the Adirondacks, but the last sighting of it was just right at the point in time I started going up there, so I never saw one, but I found it. And like the black-backed woodpecker, they favor burned out forests. And that's really, we think that's why they've disappeared from the Adirondacks. Moose galore in Alaska, right next to the car. A pair of yearlings caught with its tongue out. The posture of this cow moose is telling me, do not come any closer. And I did not. She's got the young. Caribou. My sister was determined for me to see the Pink Mountains of Alaska. This is above Fairbanks on the Steese Highway on the road to Circle. Fireweed is the state flower of Alaska, and there are these hills that are covered with it at the right time. I did go to Denali 3 times. I went on the bus ride to the end of the road. It was cloudy every time, except one day when I was there for 10 minutes, the clouds sort of cleared and you can see the north peak of Denali. Excuse me, is it Mount McKinley now? I'm not sure. You can see the north peak on the right and the higher south peak on the left. This photo is taken from 70 miles away with my telephoto lens. Grizzlies, the sow with a cub feeding on berries. And I do love wildflower photography. This is an Arctic gentian, and I'll come back to a gentian later. Quick tour through Florida. Since I grew up there, I have to show you some Florida pictures. I did make a trip to do bird photography. Yeah, don't need sandcastles. I'm not a landscape photographer, but I try. Well, we can find a gator pretty easily in Florida. Every photographer wants to photograph the roseate spoonbill, which is this incredible bird. And this one I like because not only is it a good shot in the air coming in for a landing. But the background was this pond full of white pelicans and snowy egrets. It was an amazing place. Merritt Island. Here's the original spike, a reddish egret. White pelican. Florida scrub jays, which I do remember from my youth, and they're highly threatened now. Snowy egret, trying to rustle up something by scraping its feet through the mud of the shallows. Lots of sandhill cranes in Florida. Great egret on nest with 2 eggs. Incredible feathers. And the aptly named painted bunting. Popped up out of nowhere as I was walking down a trail. Purple gallinule. Tricolored heron. Okay, the next 2 sections, and then I'll basically be done. I could do whole talks on these. Albany is here. Montreal is here. Quebec City is here. So here's the St. Lawrence. This peninsula is called the Gaspé Peninsula. It's part of Quebec. Some of you perhaps have been there. Out at the tip in the town of Percé, off Percé, there's an island called Bonaventure Island. Why did I go there? Well, there's evidence I was there, but the why I went there is in the background. This is the 2nd largest nesting site of northern gannets, the largest being, I'm blocking the name of it, in Scotland. It'll come to me. It might already be the largest because avian flu has hit, it's Bass Rocks in Scotland has hit that colony very badly. So I'm up in a tower, and what I'm showing you is less than a third of the total size of the nesting colony. So all of these birds are on a nest, and the distance between them is just perfect to be bill to bill. The estimates are probably 120,000 birds nest on this island every summer. It's been taken over by the Canadian government. It's a park. No one lives there anymore. They have interesting behaviors. This is a mated pair doing what's called fencing. But there's another interesting thing in this photo. You can see the beautiful blue orbital ring, the eye, and the iris is gray. But this one, it's black. Turns out some birds can survive avian flu, and the thinking is that the birds that have survived avian flu end up with the black iris. The gray is gone. They do another behavior called sky pointing. You can imagine in that mass of birds, how do you signal to where your mate is when he or she is flying back in? So they do this thing called sky pointing. Incredible bird. And this is a mated pair trying to decide who's going to place this stick on the nest. Incredible tan orange tinge to the head feathers. And there's a nice profile of what a northern gannet looks like. Now, like many seabirds, they nest in crevices in the cliff faces. But on this island, after humans departed, they moved up top, and you saw that huge expanse, and the colony exploded in size. Now, this is a video. We tested it before. I think there's a problem with the codec on the machine. It's not going to show you the video, but if I'm lucky, it's going to give you the audio, which is a great example of why it's not always peace and quiet. Let's see if this will. It's too bad you can't see them at the same time. So at this location, as you hike the 3 kilometers up the hill to the colony, the first thing is you smell them, and that smell stays with you for weeks. And second, you hear them. This cacophony is constant.
The first picture was, it looked like it was on a beach, but that was on the top, like the rocks on the.
That
top
was
of
on the
cliff.
top of the island of the cliff faces. Yeah. Was not a beach. This is not a beach. And in a Zodiac boat tour around the island, I found lots of interesting things, and I'll share one with you. A gray seal who posed for me. Now to Iceland. Incredible place. How many of you have been to Iceland? Okay. I'm sure you probably did the ring road, and it's just spectacular everywhere. You probably didn't go where I went. So I spent a little time in Reykjavik and a little bit more time down here in the marsh. I'll show you a couple of photos from there. But the trip was spent mostly up here, 6 days on Grimsey Island, which is the only part of Iceland that's on the Arctic Circle. So in that marsh, southeast of Reykjavik, I found another loon species. It's really partly why I did this trip, the workshop. It was a photography workshop. So now I have my second species of loon photo. There are only 5 loon species. In order to get the other 3, I'm going to have to go to Nome, Alaska. And I found chicks. One cool thing about these red-throated loons is they gave incredible flight shot opportunities. So I'm sitting at the edge of this pond with my feet in the water and my tripod in the water. Here's Grimsey Island, 3-hour ferry ride off the north coast of Iceland. I yanked this photo from a website because the whole time I was there was never a break in the clouds. This is unusual. So here's an airstrip. I took the ferry, didn't fly in. There's a harbor down here. The whole island is this cliff that is full of nesting seabirds. Okay. I could do a whole talk on this. I'm going to focus on one species that everybody loves. Okay. Can you see the little white dots? Any of you? Yeah. So here's your puffins.
Yeah.
Now, the trip was timed so that there would be young that the adults are fishing for and bringing fish back to the burrow. These fish are called sand eels. The young are in burrows, and in fact, you never see them. As I understand it, when they're ready to fledge, they fledge overnight on one night in the 2nd or 3rd week of August. They all come out at the same time and depart. So I was there for 6 days. I never saw a young puffin, but there had to be loads of them in the burrows. You'll see the burrows a little better in a moment. This guy's headed into a burrow with a mouthful. Closer. They are amusing looking birds, aren't they? But very specialized. They spend most of the year out to sea, come into nest. I love the head-on shots. This one has, I believe, some shrimp instead of fish. Oh, there's a bird with the head tilted like Nipper. Yeah, I didn't remember this. Lots of flight shots.
Wow.
Now, it's very windy. These guys are flying. They're just bombing through. It's amazing they can fly with those little squatty bodies and short wings. They're incredible creatures.
Did you eat one?
I did not.
Good.
I couldn't bring myself to, and I'm adventurous in terms of eating, but it was more, I just couldn't bring myself. Yeah. It's on the restaurant and on the menu in many restaurants in Reykjavik. Yeah. Okay, another video, and I'm going to jump ahead in this one to save a little time. So here are a bunch of them on a cliffside. You can see the burrows. Okay. This is on the east side of the island, and on this day, the wind was directly out of the east. So now think about it. Birds have to take off into the wind, but they have to land into the wind too. So this is a real issue. So watch what happens. You'll start to see them in the air in a moment. There, see them bombing by?
Yeah.
In order to land, they have to back in, and many try and don't make it, and they circle and go around and try again. Okay. You can see how fast they're bombing by, and that's the kind of flight photography I was mostly trying to do. I'll jump ahead here a little bit, save a few seconds. Can you see the grasses blowing? The reason I don't have any audio, even though I took a specialized microphone, is it was so windy that I could get nothing. Eventually, we're going to see one land. I think we're going to see one back in up here and another one down here. Oop, somebody landed at the top. There he goes. He made it. All right. So from the photographer point of view, what a boon this was, because now they're hovering out here trying to back their way in for a landing. And so the idea was to get photos of them as they're hovering, looking over their shoulder back at the potential landing spot. And I succeeded with quite a few of those. Mercifully for you, I'll only show you a couple. I came home with over 50,000 photos from this trip. All right, let me finish with a few of my favorites. Of course, there had to be a common loon in the mix on this glorious sunset. But another one of these, sometimes you don't realize what you have. When I got home to the computer, I realized there's a 2-day-old chick underneath the wing poking its head out. Can you see it? And I knew it was 2 days old because I had been camping at this pond and the adults were out 2 days prior. And then I photographed this 2 days later. Red-throated loon in Iceland coming in for a landing gear down. They use the feet as windbreaks. This is a razorbill from Iceland showing off its incredibly beautiful gape. Just yawning, that's all. Puffin coming in. Gust of wind came up from behind, so it's blown up the feathers. I call this a collared puffin. When I arrived in Iceland, I took this photo the first day. I sent it to my wife, and I was a bit anthropomorphic. I said, "This puffin wants to hug you." And here's a razorbill on the cliff surveying Grimsey Island with the ominous skies that were always there and the cliffs that are full of birds that you can't see because the distances are too big. If you looked closely, you might be able to see a bunch of little black dots in the sky. It was in millions of birds there, several different seabird species. Oyster catcher on the beach with the out of focus surf and the blue sky. Oh, there's my Arethusa. Yeah. I had to work so hard for this. It has to be in my favorite list. So here's another. I cut out a whole section on wildflowers and Lepidoptera butterflies and invertebrates just for the sake of time. But I'm glad I was able to keep this. And this is called a fringed gentian, this striking cobalt color. And I like to take photos from the top. Spatula-leaved sundew, tiny little thing with a couple of insects trapped here. Oops. Golden crowned kinglet, but I think it's orange.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Red knot, not because it's such a great photo, but the story of how this species is severely threatened. They time their migration from southern end of South America up to the Arctic. So they stop over in May in the Delmarva when the horseshoe crabs are laying eggs, and they bulk up on the horseshoe crabs and then continue on to the Arctic. Well, the horseshoe crabs have a problem. So the red knot population is collapsing. Squabbling common loon chicks. Not a great photo in my scale of things, but I love the behavior. Photographers call this kind of photograph a bird in heaven. So the intention is to get a portrait of a bird with grasses in the foreground that are out of focus because of the depth of field with the telephoto lens. So I spent about an hour trying to find the right puffin in the right spot with the right distance between the grasses and a good out of focus background. And a print of this hangs on the wall in my house. And I do love the head-on puffin shots. A moose at midnight in Alaska. Silhouette. Now I do photograph butterflies. There's a nice monarch photograph. The Carner blue butterfly. Right. And then I'll finish with this one, which has a little story. This is a trumpet lichen. It's about this big. So the story is this was one, I think, August morning, late August morning. No, it must have been later because I was doing fall foliage photography. I left the house early to go paddle a lake called Lens Lake to do fall foliage photography. I wanted to be there at sunrise. So I got some photos, packed the boat up right away after the sun came up, traveled to another lake. This is called Round Lake, near south of Johnsburg, near Garnet Lake. About 1.5 miles to carry the boat in. Okay. Paddled for a couple hours, I carry this lightweight boat attached to my external frame backpack, so I don't have to hold it, but my backpack's full of camera gear. 1.5 mile hike back out to the car. I was within about 100 yards of the car, and somehow, out of the corner of my eye, I saw on the forest floor this little clump. I'd never seen a trumpet lichen before. I knew it was a lichen species. So proceeded to go back to the car, ditch the boat. Fortunately, I had my macro lens in the car. Went back with my tripod. And now I'm setting up. So I have the legs of the tripod splayed. I'm trying to get down with the right angle. I'm on my belly. My students in the back of the room are chuckling at the vision of me laying in the mud, trying to get the photograph. I worked with things for a long time. But the problem is you want the out of focus background, but with a macro lens, the depth of field is incredibly shallow. So you can't get one photo where everything is in focus. So what you're seeing is the product of 25 photos where I advanced the focal plane just slightly, okay? And then back on the computer to merge and so on. But it wasn't just 25. I had to try many different angles because of the lighting and to get just right. So I probably was with this for an hour and then I couldn't get up off the ground after this. So I'm taking the time to tell you this story because, I love the peace and quiet, but I also love the challenge of the photography. It's getting much harder as I age. And truthfully, I should be among this demographic now instead, but I'm doing this as much as I can while I still can. I got a late start in life. But what it combined for me was the observational skills of a scientist, because I noticed this thing on the forest floor. And then the determination that I wasn't going to just put the canoe away and go home. I came back and I did what it took to get the composition that I wanted. And then it required software skills, which is my other bailiwick. The only thing that this photo doesn't encompass that is my interest in nature photography is the animal behavior part, but everything else is right there. And my voice is going. And that's my last slide. I'm happy to take questions. If you want to take another 45 minutes, I can show you more. I have more slides.
So puffins sleep at sea, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, they'll be on the water as they're out there for 8 months of the year. Same with northern gannets, all these seabirds, right? They don't come to land.
The waves and everything else.
Yeah. Yep.
Other birds do that too?
Yeah, multiple seabird species. Yeah.
When you take those photos from the canoe, do you use a tripod?
I tried and I can't. So, it's different lenses. My biggest lens, I will not take in my lightweight canoe. I feel a little too unstable with it. In my the green canoe you saw once, it's a fishing kayak, and there's kind of a tray that comes up.
Yeah.
And I have a little pad on top so I can rest the big lens on it. But in my lightweight canoe, I take other lenses that are not quite as long.
How long is that lens?
The short answer is my biggest lens is a 600 millimeter lens. It's about this long.
Yeah, how much is that weigh?
7-8 pounds with the camera on it, add a little bit more. I can't hand hold it for very long. But I have others that are nearly as long that I can. I have a 100 to 500 that I can use.
Yeah.
Yeah. George?
Do you have image stabilizing camera?
Yeah. This is kind of the longer story I took this up late in life. I gave up another hobby to do it. And I decided pretty early on, I wasn't going to let the equipment be an obstacle. I wanted the product to come from my skill set. And that's what really.
You're about 1 million shots.
Yeah. Well, these new cameras now, they do have image stabilization, but they have, my best camera does 40 frames a second. I go home from a basketball game with 6,000 photos.
Thank you, digital.
Thanks to digital. Yeah, I would be worthless in the film age where you had to really be good at photography. Yeah. David?
I was going to initially comment on how superbly you found these glossy surfaced waters to do things. But as you went through the rest of the presentation, which was great, by the way, I love the whole thing.
Thank you.
I realized what it took from you, from your academic and scientific background, is an infinite capacity for delayed gratification.
Yeah.
That you have a wellspring of patience that I don't think I could ever have. To wait and wait and wait and try again and again and again. And it's paid off because a lot of these were really, really great.
That is your science background. Gives you that thing.
Yeah, it is. And I appreciate that. But, I also must say, spending the amount of time I do out in the natural world is very comfortable to me. And especially in the Adirondacks, I've found myself thinking and wondering about who's stepped here before. And it's kindled an interest in indigenous people's history in the Adirondacks. And it's led me to places that are surprising to even me. I'm a scientist. I think like a scientist. I'm thinking about ecosystems and biospheres and dynamic weather systems and dynamic geology. But, the indigenous people's way of looking at the world is an interesting other way. And I've run across that literature a bit. So, I spend my days here on my computer doing programming. So what a great counterpoint this is to that. And if peace and quiet isn't quite the most accurate acronym, it really is that it gives me an outlet to wind down, but it still requires energy and thought. So it's been just a super hobby for me.
Would you say that's Eastern philosophy?
Yeah, what I'd recommend? You can do an easy Google search on the Haudenosaunee Thanksgiving address. and then you get a sense of what is truly the whole Native American philosophy of existing in the environment. There's also an interesting Google search you could do. If you do UAlbany Haudenosaunee Thanksgiving address, you'll find the Indigenous Students Organization on campus has done a beautiful video with drone shots of the campus in fall and reciting this Thanksgiving address. Thanksgiving doesn't mean what it does to us in the Euro-American sense. And I didn't think I was going to go off on this tangent here, but I have an appreciation for the natural world in many different ways, and I'm pleased with myself that I would contemplate those other ways of looking at it as well. Yeah. Anything else? Have you guys had enough of me?
Yeah.
I can come back and do the other part next week. Right. Thank you very much.
Don't anybody pray for snow for that? I come to these things sometimes, I'm not sure that it just. But by the time of the end of the presentation, I remind you that there's pretty back there of our